a co-ed killer. Edmund Kemper is an American serial killer and necrophile who carried out a series of brutal murders in California in the 1970s. He murdered his grandparents when he was 15 years old, and later killed and dismembered 6 female hitchhikers in the Santa Cruz area. He then murdered his mother and one of her friends before turning himself into police days later. He was found guilty in November 1973 of 8 counts of murder. He asked for the death penalty, but instead received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Number 9. Dennis Rader murdered 10 people in Sedgwick County, Wichita, Kansas between 1974 and 1991. Obsessed with notoriety, Rader sent taunting letters to police under the name BTK, which stood for Bind, Torture, Kill. Rader stalked his victims before breaking into their homes, then binded their limbs before strangling them. Having disappeared in 1988, BTK reemerged in 2005 when he sent a floppy disk to the press that chose to be his downfall. Tracing him via the floppy disk, Rader was arrested and charged, upon which he immediately confessed. He is serving 10 consecutive life sentences with an earliest possible release date of February 26, 2180. Known as the Acid Bath Murderer, John George High was an English serial killer during the 1940s. He is convicted of the murders of 6 people, although he claimed to have killed 9. A professional conman, he targeted wealthy individuals and charmed them into believing he was a successful businessman. He lured his victims to a derelict warehouse before shooting them. He then dissolved their bodies in sulfuric acid before forging papers in order to sell their possessions and collect their life savings. Traces of human remains were found, and there is sufficient evidence to convict him. In 1949, he was sentenced to death and hanged at Wandsworth Prison. Number 7. Peter William Sutcliffe is a British serial killer known as a Yorkshire Ripper. In 1981, Sutcliffe was convicted of murdering 13 women and attempting to murder 7 others. He targeted prostitutes in Leeds and Bradford area, causing a climate of fear across northern England. When arrested in January 1981 for driving with false number plates, police questioned him about the killings and he confessed. At his trial, he pleaded not guilty to murder on grounds of diminished responsibility, but his defense was rejected by the jury. He was sentenced to serve life imprisonment without parole and remains in Broadmoor Maximum Security Mental Hospital to this day. Number 6. Richard Ramirez was an American serial killer and Satan worshipper who terrorized Los Angeles between 1984 and 1985. Nicknamed the Night Stalker, Ramirez broke into the homes of many of his victims, shooting, stabbing, raping, and mutilating his victims, who ranged between a 9-year-old girl and a married couple aged in their late 60s. Notably, he smeared pentagrams on the walls of the crime scenes. Captured in 1985, Ramirez was sentenced to death and remained in California's death row for 23 years until he died in his cell in June 2013. Number 5. Known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, Jeffrey Dahmer was an American serial killer and sex offender who raped, murdered, and dismembered 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. He also committed necrophilia and ate parts of his later victims, dismembering and cooking parts of their bodies within his home. Dahmer was eventually caught after a would-be victim managed to overpower him and alert police. In 1992, Dahmer was convicted of 15 of the murders and sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment. However, just 2 years into his sentence, he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution. Number 4. The British equivalent of Jeffrey Dahmer, Dennis Nilsen, was a homosexual killer who murdered 15 gay men within home in London, England between 1978 and 1983. He retained his victims' bodies before dissecting the remains and disposing of their bodies by burning or flushing the remains down the toilet, which led to his capture when human flesh was discovered in a sewage system. Nilsen was convicted in 1983 of 6 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment. He remains imprisoned at Full Sutton Maximum Security Prison in Yorkshire, England, without the chance of release. Number 3. One of the United States' most prolific serial killers, Gary Ridgway, was arrested in 2001 for 4 murders, though confessed to killing at least 70 women in Washington state throughout the 1980s and 90s. He avoided the death penalty by providing detailed confessions and led police to the dumping sites of his victims, 5 of whom he dumped in the Green River, leading to the press nicknaming him the Green River Killer. He was convicted of 49 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Number 2. Dr. Harold Frederick Shipman was an English doctor and is one of the world's most prolific serial killers in recorded history, proven to have been responsible for up to 250 murders. A trusted doctor, he was well respected in his community. However, colleagues and local undertakers began raising concerns over the high death rate in the area and a large number of cremation forms for elderly women that he had countersigned. Several bodies were later exhumed and postmortems revealed diamorphine within the system. It was later established Shipman had purposely injected fatal doses of the drug into a huge number of patients, causing their death. He then forged their wills so he could inherit large sums of money and completed cremation requests to destroy the victims' bodies. The trial judge sentenced him to 15 consecutive life sentences and recommended that he never be released. Shipman later hanged himself in January 2004 in his cell at Wakefield Prison. Number 1. Pedro Alonso Lopez is a Colombian serial killer accused of raping and killing more than 300 girls across South America. He lured them to secluded areas inside unoccupied buildings where he raped each of them before killing them by a range of brutal methods, primarily strangulation. Lopez was arrested when an attempted abduction failed and he was trapped by market traders. He confessed to over 300 murders. The police only believed him when a flash flood uncovered a mass grave containing many of his victims. Eventually, 53 bodies were discovered. In prison in 1980, he served just 18 years before being released from Ecuadorian prison and was deported to Colombia, where he was rearrested in 2002, was sentenced to life. We hope you enjoyed the 10 worst serial killers in history. Which one did you think was the most brutal? If you have any ideas for our next top 10, leave them in the comments below. Remember to like, subscribe, and tell your friends. Have a good day. Goodbye.